rejection of the civilization of the white man. So at this point, I'm going to make a jump into Maria Lugones' essay. So what Maria Lugones does in this particular essay is where she goes on to say the dichotomy or that division between the human and the non-human is what she calls the central dichotomy of the colonial modernity. And what on earth does that mean? Right? So basically it says everything to do with the colonial rule had this as the basic division, right? This is where the oppressive framework was, kind of, this is the basis of that oppressive foundation, right? So what does it say? That division between the human and the non-human. So what does it actually imply? What that's trying to say is only anyone who was white was considered as human, right? So only white men and white women were considered as human beings. So everyone else was considered as the other, right? Everyone else was considered as non-human, right, or animal. And people from, indigenous people of the Africa, the Americas, were all considered as, bestial. We're all considered as animals, as animals, right? So that dehumanization is something that is really important. So let's go back to that particular point. We spoke about Delavinet's definition, which tells us about the rejection of the civilization of the white man. And then I made that jump to Maria Lugones' essay. So the two important divisions that she talks about. The first one is the division between the modern and what she calls the non-modern. Now this is really important because in popular discourse, the division is between the pre-modern and the modern, where the West would represent everything that is modern, and everything that is non-West would represent the pre-modern or something that is primitive. Now, Maria Lugones in her essay goes on to say there is this dichotomy, but it is not pre-modern, it is non-modern. So there is a very clear distinction between what is pre-modern and what is non-modern. So just because it is not Western, doesn't mean that it is not modern, right? So that is the political assertion there. I hope that's clear. So this is the first one. That dichotomy between the modern and the non-modern, and that non-modern is a corrective to the use of the term, there kind of replaces the term pre-modern, which is usually used to perpetuate notions of inferiority and or primitiveness, which is stereotypically associated with the non-West. I hope that is clear. So that's the first one. The second one we already touched upon is that division between the human and the non-human. So that hierarchy is something that is extremely important to consider. Now, what do I mean by that hierarchy? So you have the white male who represents perfection, right? The white male was the norm, right? And the white female, in relation to the white male, of course, had a marginal presence, where the white female was just a companion, mainly, and whose purpose was reduced to the sole purpose of reproduction of race and capital. So where what Maria Lugones is kind of going on to say is that there is that strict hierarchy there. So you have certain privileges and certain disadvantages, right? So the white male is a supreme, is a norm, and everyone else is the other already. So the white female is not really considered as his equal, but as instruments for the reproduction of race and capital. Now, everything else, people, the other, everyone except for the white male and the white female were really considered as non-human. So this is one of the dichotomies that she really takes into consideration when she goes on to theorize what she means by decolonial feminism and why is it important. Now, before we go into anything else, I'm going to discuss the sort of third theoretical sort of framework. So the first one was the set of definitions of decolonial frameworks, or what does decolonization mean. So that's where we started. What does decolonization mean? Then we went on to look at Maria Lugones. So there we looked at three different aspects, right? One is about the dichotomy between the modern and the non-modern. The second one is between the human and the animal. And the third part is we went on to see how there is a kind of hierarchy, isn't it? Yeah, white male at the top, white female below that, and then everyone is non-human. Clear? I'm hoping that this is clear because I just don't see the point if I'm talking for 1 hour and nobody gets anything. I don't want it to be the case. But what I hope to do is to take the three examples from Africa, Latin America, and India and to simplify this further. But I'm hoping that this is okay for now. If you have any doubts or questions at this stage, please feel free to send them in the chat or ask me right away. Okay, so that's where we are at this juncture. About these two different aspects. At this point, I'm going to introduce you to intersectionality. Is there anyone who's heard of the term intersectionality? Have you read anything about intersectionality? I'll type it up in the chat. Intersectionality. You could read Kimberly Crenshaw. It sounds really fancy, but actually it's trying to say something very, very basic. Let me give you an example and go on to say what is this idea or this, whether we're talking about it as a theoretical device or a methodological framework or a heuristic device or whatever it is, doesn't really matter. Basically, it is a very, very simple idea. What does intersectionality mean? Let's take an example. Let's say a black woman's experience is very much different from a white woman's experience, isn't it? So the white woman is a beneficiary of her race, like she's white. However, being a woman, she has, she has sort of a marginal presence because of her gender, right? Now, whereas for a black woman, she experiences oppression because of her race and because of her gender. So, where the right way of saying this would be that experience is cumulative. What does that mean? It adds. So, if I am, let's take another example. Let's say, for example, race, class, gender, and let's say, for example, ability or disability. Let's say if you're taking a brown woman in the UK, for example, and she is also differently abled. So then, the kind of intersections that we will look at, she experiences difficulties because of her race, because of her class, because of her gender, and because of her ability or disability. We can also take other categories such as age or, sexuality, for example. Right, so these are the different factors or different not rubrics. These are different categories which kind of intersect, and that oppression would be a product of all these different structures and all these different categories. So intersectionality simply means that your oppression would be a product of the different factors that we are going to consider. And intersectionality is one of the most commonly used frameworks in feminist studies now. Even if you look at any of the UN women's research or conferences or contemporary research, is primarily intersectional. It is also interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary. So the two important words that you need to do any kind of research. I mean, I'm not talking purely about literature or literature or gender. I think it's pretty much the case, regardless of the discipline that you're working with. I work on literature development studies in human rights, and I'm working on intersectionality regardless of which subjects I'm working on. Even if you take environmental studies or something like that, intersectionality and interdisciplinarity are key concepts or key frameworks that you need. So that is why I mentioned intersectionality. Why did I mention intersectionality here? It is because it's something that Maria Lugones goes on to say. But Maria Lugones, be careful, does not use the word, she does not really talk about Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw wrote this essay in 1989. I think it's called Mapping the Margins, something like that. It's on my bibliography. I will give it to you later. But the essay starts with something like Mapping the Margins. It's published in the Stanford Review, I think. So this is where she says about structural inequality, representational inequality, political intersectionality, so on and so forth. Structural, political, and representational intersectionality. So why did I use that word? Although Maria Lagons doesn't really use that particular term, what she goes on to say is we have to theorize from multiple bodies, multiple histories, multiple cultures. Now, this is a key idea I want you to understand. What does it mean to decolonize? To, to give it to you in very simple words, what that means is usually well I'm aware of the fact that I'm talking about decolonial studies within the Western academia, so on and so forth, so I understand the contradictions here, but it's something that I grapple with on a daily basis. However, what I want to say is decolonizing means to unlearn some of the colonial constructions of different races and different cultures and so on and so forth, and to sort of to produce experientially grounded knowledge. So now this theory praxis clash is a big thing here. So I will show you how we will address it in decolonial research. But simply put it, it's about trying to represent your experiences and what experiences matter to you. To simply put it, for example, when we talk about, say, for example, something like feminism in the UK, for example. So when I take something like that, race and gender become important things to consider. Race, class, and gender. But if I'm doing research in India or if I'm doing research in Kerala, where I wouldn't really look at race, I would look at caste, class, and gender, right? So there is a change in the rubric. I mean, of course, one is easily reminded of Edward Said and traveling theory, but if you're interested, there's also another essay by Gail Lewis. I think it's called What Happens When Intersectionality Travels. Don't quote me on the title, but it will be on my bibliography. But just to say that, in case if you need it, you can use that essay, which is to say that what intersections matter will depend on the particular geographical context within which a particular research is embedded in. As simple as the example I gave you. If I'm studying about, black and brown women in the UK, I would go on and look at race and gender, class, ability, disability, age, so on and so forth. Whereas if I'm doing research on women in Kerala, I would look at caste, which is something that is important to us geopolitically. So that is the key idea there. So which intersections matter in different contexts is something that is so important to decolonial studies. I hope I'm making sense. If you have any thoughts, questions, or doubts, please do feel free to ask. Okay, so so I did mention that most of you are undergraduates, so I don't really want to burden you with a lot of theory. So what I'm going to do now is to go on to tell you a few examples of decolonial studies and decolonial research. So let's have a quick recap. So we spoke about rejection of the civilization of the white man, and then we went on to speak about, what are the aspects that are really important, which is where we went on to speak about Maria Lugones, the dichotomy between the pre-modern and modern, or non-modern and modern, and the dichotomy between the human and the non-human, and the different hierarchies. So equally important is the dehumanization of the indigenous body, and also looking at indigenous women and indigenous men only as sources of labor, and of course indigenous female bodies were exploited for sexual gratification of the colonizer. So I did have a major section on embodiment and body and resistance, but because I heard that most of your undergraduates, I did delete it because it had quite a lot of dense theoretical concepts. So I thought I would rather delete all of that and go on to introduce you to the key concepts through simple examples that we can discuss very easily. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at what does decolonial knowledge production mean. So let's have a look at how decolonial knowledge production helps to discuss indigenous feminist approaches and knowledges to address specific geopolitical concerns. So the first one I'm going to look at is somebody called uh, Lagaria Jambi. So I'm going to write the name in the chat. Um, and I think this is an essay I really like because it is a very simple essay, and her essay on female circumcision, so female genital mutilation. So what she kind of says is the colonial discussions of this kind of present it as as oppressive, as really oppressive, so on and so forth. And Jambi goes on to write this article in which he goes on to present a different view of what that meant for her culture against the backdrop of the Mau rebellion. So this is a really interesting and a very easy essay to sort of help explain the concepts or the ideas that we've been trying to look at. So, um, so for example, you can look at, so this is the first one that we will look at, the one by Jambi. The second one we're going to look at is Laura Rodriguez, and this is another favorite research of mine. I really love this research. Laura Rodriguez Castro's book on decolonial feminism, in which she goes on to talk about rural campesina women in Latin America. So this is a very interesting piece of research as well. So they have a framework. And then the third one, we can probably talk about. Well, I know very carefully that I'm very aware of the fact that I'm introducing a very controversial figure, but I'm just going to forget all of the political leanings and new autobiography and everything. I'm just going to mention C.K. Janu because her memoir, which was published a few years ago, I am not talking about the one that was published very recently. The one that was published a few years ago, I think it was translated by Mr. Ravindran. I think I forgot what his name was, but it's a beautiful translation. So I'm going to talk about this because when we talk about this within the Kerala context, it would make more sense to us. So that would be the three different examples that we're going to look at. Okay, so let's have a look at the first one. So we are going to look at yeah, we're going to look at decolonizing knowledge. So before we start the examples, let's have a quick look at this slide. Yeah, so you can see, well, I put Cersei Mendes there, don't worry about it. We don't need Cersei Mendes today. All she says is that we really have to look at multiple bodies and multiple histories, that is it. But what we need is that red highlight. I'm hoping that you can see the quotes on the board. Can you see the red highlight? Am I still audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are. Are you able to see the slides and the red highlight?
Yes.
Okay, now this is the heart and soul of decolonial feminism as discussed by Lagans. I will talk about this before I go into the examples. So this is a key idea. So basically there was somebody called Anibal Kurhano, and what he did was he used only two things to study about colonialism. One was race and the other one was capital. So he looked at the intersection of race and capital. That's all that he looked at. Now, this is where Maria Lagons comes and says, well, that is not enough. And she goes on to say the problem with Anibal Kuhano is that what he did was he kind of um, looked at gender only in terms of sexual access to women. So that kind of erased a lot of experiences, right? So the discussion of gender was limited to sexual access to women. So this is where Maria Lagons introduces a third component into the framework, which is you look at race, class, and gender. So this is why it goes on to say the analysis of racialized capitalist gender oppression is what she calls the coloniality of gender, and the possibility of overcoming the coloniality of gender. How can we look at the intersection of race, class, and gender, race, capital, and gender? Now that is what she calls. How can we, how does this pan out? And the possibility of overcoming everything that is a product of the intersection of these three due to the or against the backdrop of the colonial rule or in consequence to the colonial rule, the possibility of overcoming that is what she calls decolonial feminism. I hope that helps a bit. Um, okay, so if anybody wants the bibliography, I would say the first essay is a great essay on challenging imperial feminism, and that's also one that really looks at when academics write about it. You're romanticizing it, and it sounds like the post-colonial discourse, but it was published around 1984. It's one of the most important essays I have read on the gap between knowledge production and this. I think when I read C.K. Janu's autobiography, it had this beautiful part where she goes on to say, people who write about our experiences should come from our communities, because otherwise it's always will always be disconnected from our lived experience, or it will always be romanticized. So she makes a very political point about it. So these are some of the texts that I've been talking about. All the theories are on the board. I didn't really talk about Nivedita Menon and intersectionality. She's got a good critique of intersectionality, along with Mary John. I haven't really gone into that. This is Oiron case text that I was talking about. But yeah, this is it pretty much if you want to take pictures or whatever. So that is the bibliography. So what was I particularly going to say? Yeah, about the specific examples. So I hope at least you have some kind of idea about what is decolonial feminism. It is to sort of criticize what has been written about the other or about the non-West. What has the West said about these things? And we would go and look at what is wrong with that. What are the ways in which we can correct it? What are the ways in which we can highlight indigenous systems of knowledge production? Like, say, for example, I think I really like Sike Jalu, where she goes on to talk about, we know about, we know how to look at the sky and, say, predict the weather, or we know the medicines in the forest for this, that, and this. All these are systems of knowledge, right? So the colonial rule kind of denigrated, kind of relegated a lot of indigenous systems of knowledge in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, so on and so forth. So decolonial feminism, or decolonization in general, aims to focus on knowledge production. What is wrong about what has been written about the Non-West? What is the right way of representing it based on the lived experiences of people? So the popular discourse kind of says that, oh, only when people enter into capitalistic relations would, especially, women in the global south, only when they, were educated, they get a job, when they are economically independent, will they have autonomy. But that's not really the case, right? Because, say, for example, we have caste and class and so many other factors. We also have, issues pertaining to social mobility and traditions. There are so many other cultural factors which are really important. So every place requires a very careful understanding of the geopolitical aspects that really, that really affect agency of people in that particular place. So that's where we're trying to move away from Western frameworks, and we're going to adopt and adapt indigenous systems of knowledge production and what is relevant to our lived experiences and what are the indigenous ways of living and being. So this is where we go into epistemology and ontology and other frameworks and so on and so forth. But I hope that you got some kind of idea about it. So the basic idea of body here comes, especially in the context of, we take into consideration, say for example, people want to work in plantations in Fiji or whatever. So how different were the experiences of different people? And when we say people, we're not really talking about men and women. So that reduction of people to gender binary, that is a product of colonial rule. Also, that kind of normative heterosexuality, and the kind of the role that colonialism had in the propagation or in the perpetuation of normative heterosexuality, for example. So these are different aspects that all these writers go on to interrogate. Now let's have a look at simple examples, just so that it makes it more relatable. So I kind of gave you some a basic introduction about Jambi's work. So I'm going to sort of discuss this in detail. So the first one is about, yeah, I'll start with Jambi and then go on to Oyevumi. So it goes on to say, So I kind of hinted at this before. So where the colonial discourse kind of said, oh, all these people in all these cultures, they practice female genital mutilation. That is absolutely atrocious. It oppresses women, so on and so forth. So this is the colonial sort of perspective on it. And at this point, Jambi goes on to say what it meant for the Gikuyu women, right, during the anti-colonial resistance. So she goes on to say, um, so she goes on to say, well, when the colonizers say that this is oppressive and this oppresses women, um, what they don't really mention is that how she talks about a particular battle. So she says, in the Great Battle of Nevasha, what happened was the colonizers actually killed so many women, indigenous women. And she goes on to write, I'll read it out loud. So what is Islam to decolonize? So it sounds like this. Women were subjected to rape, sodomy, killing, having their breasts crushed, food deprivation, and hard labor. And then she goes on to say sodomy with bottles, snakes, and vermin, beatings, and verbal attacks. And so these were all things that indigenous women suffered at the hands of the colonizers. So you tell us that our culture is oppressive, but what have you done to us? So this is one of the questions that she kind of talks back. Remember that essay, the Empire Rights Fact sort of thing, or the phrase, the Empire Rights Fact sort of situation. Yeah, so this is one. So there, what is she trying to do? She's trying to highlight the historical atrocities of the colonizers against African women and their culture. So this is one, for example. The second thing that she does is she says, well, you think that is oppressive, but we think that's in the that's just an act of liberation because when we underwent that practice, we were considered equal to the men who went and fought in the battles. Also, men and women fought in the battles, right? So it was just a means of expressing their agency rather than, rather than something that made them victims of an oppressive culture. So this is again a correctivism. She says that's what you think, but we think this is something that made us feel great about ourselves because we were equally involved in the struggle against the colonizer. Yeah, so this is the second. So these are like, I'm just taking very silly examples, very brief examples to help you understand. So look at what she's done there. A, she says, this is what is wrong about what you've written about us. And B, she goes on to say, well, this is what we as a culture, we as a group, we the Gikuyu women, this is what we think. But I have a critique of it though. Well, the interesting thing is, well, I think she does a great job when she talks about, how she goes on to talk about, you know, um, homosexuality, how normal it was in their culture, the multiple genders which existed in their society, the multiple sexualities which existed in the pre-colonial African society, which all sound great, right? But however, well, I kind of find it a bit problematic that in spite of how kind of liberal she comes across as, consciously or unconsciously she reinforces a gender binary through and through, which I think is a bit problematic. So that's just my take on it. However, she does a great critique of the involvement of the church, actually, basically the critique of Victorian morality. I'll go on to read it. And this is my article on it, so I'm just going to read one part of it, which is by visibilizing the ruthless abuse and exploitation of Native women by the colonizer, um, Jambi's narrative mocks at the emptiness and hypocrisy of the colonial perpetuation of the notion of the Victorian morality and colonial civility. Jambi challenges not just the colonial victimization of Gikuyu women as helpless forms of men and denigration of their traditions as barbaric, but also the colonial brutality and sexual exploitation of women, which has additionally been erased from history. So this is the third thing that she says. Well, you came and abused and killed a lot of our women, but you haven't written about that when you wrote history books. So she's critiquing it. So this is a very powerful way of saying this is what is wrong about what you've written. This is what you forgot about what you did to us. You have not written it, and this is what you've written incorrectly about us, and this is what I've got to say about my culture, and it's better you educate yourself. So this is the kind of This is just one of the perspectives that I'm trying to explain. I hope it's a lot clearer now. So this is just one example of it. Now, the second example I'm going to take is Oivomi's example. This again is a great example. I really like that research. It's really beautiful research on Yoruba society. Um, so um, again, I'm going to go back to Maria Lagon's just for a split second, where I'm going to just take one of the sentences from Maria Lagon's, where she goes on to say, gender is a colonial imposition. So it is a colonial construct. I think it is Maria Lagon's in another part of the essay. She goes on to say, gender doesn't travel away from the colonial modernity. So anyway, so I'm going to take you to Oivomi's study on Yoruba society. So I'm just going to write the second name because it's a long name. Well, I sound really horrible when I say that. Sorry, nearly dropped my iPad. So I'm just going to write the second name because it really immediately will take you to the article. Oiwome. Oiwome. So there you go. That's the name. So I want to study on Yoruba society in southwestern Nigeria, for instance, demonstrates and debunks Western constructions of gender as a universal and fundamental organizing principle of a society. Let's look at a few examples, yeah? So basically, what is she trying to say? Gender was not really important to their culture. They didn't have anything to do with gender. Now, how does Oivomi establish this? Let's look at a few examples that she says. A, there is a word called omo, O-M-O, omo. So basically, the word omo is used, it doesn't matter whether a child is boy or girl, they would use the same word omo. But the problem with this, again, just as was in the case of Janvi, she reinforces a gender binary, and that's something that I've got a problem with. Um, Another example, she's got a word called oko. There's a word called oko. The other one is a word called omo. Omo is the one used for child, so gender was not really important. Oko is a word for, a partner, right? A husband or wife, regardless of, whether, this was the word that was used. So they didn't really care about gender. Their society was organized based on age, right? So age was a sort of organizing principle, chronological age. And the other thing that determined their seniority was sort of whether they entered the family by blood relation or whether they entered a family by marriage. So, where it doesn't really matter what your gender is, right? I mean, you were to sort of go back to Judith Butler and performativity. I don't want to go there now. The gender is a performance, right? That's that particular aspect. So I hope you understood the second thing. What is the point that she's trying to say? Hey, let me give you another simple example to help you understand this. Within Black feminism, there was this big example. I think I have written it somewhere in my essay. Well, I've written quite a few essays on it because I did it for my MA and for my PhD. So there is a simple example which will help us to understand this, right? So during the waves of the feminist movement, there was a major shift towards nuclear families, right? Everybody wanted nuclear families, right? But then in Black feminism, it was really important that nuclear family was not something that was important to Black feminism because there what was more important was the joint family system or something like that and our other mothering and very community based system. So that they had sort of differing aims or different goals with regards to even their family. For example, so you can't really go with the logic of white feminism that way. That becomes normative and it completely is disconnected from the ideals and values and goals of Black feminism. So you need different frameworks which are rooted in your lived experiences and your geopolitical and cultural realities. So that's the thing. So when white feminists were arguing for nuclear families, Black feminists had a very different agenda. So they differ in their goals, and by virtue of that, they differ different approaches and different epistemological frameworks rooted in their respective experiences, their respective experiences. So let's have a look at another simple example which is from Maria Lugon, not Maria Lugon's research, Laura Rodriguez Castro's research. Well, there are like 1,000 examples in that book. I'm just going to take one basic one, which is she goes on to say the rural women, the rural campesina women, I'm not really going into the different hierarchies, mestizo of women, and so on and so forth. I'm not talking about that here. I'm just talking about this part where she goes on to say, for the rural women there, um, they did not want to go to college and get a degree and enter into the sort of capitalist relation, earn and have a livelihood sort of thing. That wasn't their agenda. Their concerns were different. They always had struggles for their land. So their land was so inextricably entwined with their identity. So what always mattered to them was resisting capitalism, fighting for their land, fighting for their security, fighting for their identity, fighting for their rights. So this is what is important to them. And you see something very similar in C.K. John if you read the autobiography or the translation, which is called Mother Earth. So, well, I have certain problems with that text. There is beautiful translation, but there are certain dislocations which I think are quite problematic. But anyway, um, but she kind of says something very similar about it. So the point I wanted to say here is about there's a part where halfway through the research, she uses a lot of testimonies of rural women. So this is one way to address the gap between theory and practice instead of the academic quote unquote speaking for the subaltern. The integration of testimonies kind of help bridge that gap, I think. And I'm also somebody who kind of believes in Bell Hooks's kind of idea of theory as a laboratory practice. So I think I have so much hope and faith in research, and particularly the use of testimony, I think is a great way forward. The particular part I was about to talk about was about how these women, what they did was they started farming. So they started cultivating, and their goal was we do not want anything to do with markets and capitalists. What we want to do is we want our own land, and we want our own rights, and we want rights over our body. What we are going to do is we are going to grow crops. So gardens and all these places where they grew crops became a place of building communities, of networks of women, female bonding and solidarity. Then what happened was they started growing their own crops. They started producing their own goods. So this was their way of resisting capitalism, right? So now that theorization, if you were to adopt the stereotypical or the Western frameworks, the problem with that, I think I've sort of summarized it on my first slide here. Look, so the colonial or the neo-colonial focus is on progress, right? The problem with that is you overlook modernization and economic empowerment. So what happens as a result is that indigenous women's concerns remain obscured because of the hegemony of Western and or upper caste or upper class feminist narratives. So that way, sometimes what happens is it also results in the perpetuation of Orientalist tropes of third world women. I actually found for one of the essays I wrote at SOAS for a module on development studies, I was studying something to do with the UN Women, some document. In fact, it had very racial stereotypes, and it was very shocking to see it on a document um, like that. So, I think the kind of depiction of third world women is just a bit problematic. So it always consciously or unconsciously presents that forges that binary between the civilized and the saved. So that way, decolonial feminist knowledge production, what it does is to highlight multiple histories of multiple bodies in multiple cultures. That way, it helps uproot Eurocentrism and heteropatriarchy among other intersecting oppressive forces. So I did discuss these two examples. For example, three examples actually. The one in Latin America, where women started cultivating and they started, interacting with each other, building communities, supporting each other, resisting reliance on markets and so on. So that is one of the examples I'm taking from that text. Yoruba society, they didn't have anything to do with, that sort of gender was not really important to their lived experience. It had more to do with age and blood relation and things like that. And then the third example we spoke about was the different perspective, a kind of rewriting of history. It's sort of what I can call a palimpsestic narrative of imperialism, where it goes on to say, well, this is what you wrote about female genital mutilation, but for us during the Mau Mau rebellion, it meant us, it kind of helped us feel like warriors. So you're saying that we're oppressed women, that is absolute nonsense. So that's what she attempts to highlight. Now let's have a quick look at C.K. Janu, right? So well, I wrote this 3 years ago. So um, but I do have a lot of new things to say. Why I said I wrote this 3 years ago is because now she's published another book, and then her political affiliation. So many things have changed. So it makes you really skeptical about a few things. Be that as it may, the brilliant thing that she does in that particular book is to talk about indigenous systems of knowing and living and being, where she goes on to talk about the loss of their land, the struggle for their land, how educational system alienates them, their systems of being. Like I'm very aware of the politics of othering. That I kind of partake in consciously and unconsciously whilst I speak. However, what she kind of goes on to do is to critique the developmental initiatives, the neo-colonial implications of, what goes back to, the colonial plantations and so on and so forth, and the taking away of lands and development projects and so on and so forth, which takes us to consider the land rights, the struggle for the Dalit tribal population. She kind of goes on to criticize the representations of the subaltern in the academia. And in fact, there is a part in the text where she goes on to write, which I think is really powerful. She goes on to say, quote, "It is necessary that people who know about our real situations and are willing to work to resolve them should come from within our own community itself. Many of our problems will be solved only if we continue to live and work close to the land." So, and then she goes on to say, like another thing that she does, for example, she debunks savannah tropes of tribal women as helpless. That victimization is something that she really powerfully critiques in that book. And she goes on to say, she highlights the agency that tribal women in Wynad exist in light of being breadwinners of the family, how they cultivate and they earn their own livelihood. And they're not really helpless women, as popular discourse frames them to be. And then she also goes on to talk about collective strength and agency. She goes on to, so there is a very, in fact, there is a very powerful critique of the historical representations as well. In fact, there is a part in the book where she goes on to say something very powerful. She goes on to talk about the coffee plantations since the colonial rule, and she goes on to write something. This is something that's, this translation came out in 2008 or something. Look at what she writes in the book, quote, "If there were no bullocks around, we also howl the plough like animals." So how people there are made to work like animals really connects to what Maria Lugones does in the Latin American context, where she goes on to talk about that dichotomy between the human and the non-human. But we will have to reframe that axis using, instead of race, we would have to take caste, right? And then how people are treated as animals. In fact, there is a line where she goes on to say how they would pluck the fields like animals, right? So it's that dehumanization. She goes on to talk about how they are served food on the floor, right? So these are all very powerful ways of critiquing Brahminical hegemony, and of course there are colonial roots of that. If you were to read Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak, or Lakdamani's Contentious Traditions, you would easily know what I'm talking about. So basically, because tribal women have experiences which are influenced by their unique geopolitical dimensions and confront indigenous concerns, which differ completely from mainstream middle class feminist narratives that over the progress, development, and economic empowerment, their decolonial feminist ethnographic accounts are to be acknowledged as valid, informative, and important, like academic and or mainstream feminist narratives for their demands. So why is it so important that we listen to these things? Because it really helps to highlight and address a lot of human rights violations which remain ignored. A couple of years ago when the Madhu incident happened, I couldn't help but I couldn't stop thinking about Agamben and biopolitics, right? That inclusive exclusion state, or that even Ashili Membe's discussion of something called the necropolitics, which is a concept which I really like to read in line with Judith Butler's discussion of disposable lives, which lives matter and which lives don't. Or the tragedy that happened in Greek, I think two shipwrecks, right? The whole politics of death becoming certain types of certain bodies dying. or certain bodies being constantly under struggle or being exposed to deprivation becomes completely okay. Or you know what's happening in Gaza right now, right? Last day, you know, it's an ongoing thing. So that kind of insensitivity towards death of certain bodies, of violation of rights of certain bodies, is something that is absolutely horrifying. And it is against this backdrop that feminist decolonization, you know, beyond the scope of theory, I think it also is a practical task. In fact, Maria Lagons goes on to say it is very much a practical task, and whether it's development studies or whether it's human rights discourse or practice, feminist decolonization has a very, very important, contributions to make. And so that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that was clear and understandable. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your comments and suggestions and critiques or questions if there are any. Thank you.
Now the topic has been presented wonderfully well. Um, she has given insight on the views of Maria Gilvans, Gail Lewis, Ngaria Njami, Laura Rodriguez Castros, and different aspects of the topic have been touched by the intersectionality, the need of unlearning colonial constructions, female circumcision. So even I have understood the term decolonial as synonymous with post-colonial. And her talk has given insight on the distinction between these terms. She has anticipated PG students as her audience, and she has simplified as far as possible. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Now it is the time for question and answer. If you have anything to add or seeking any clarification, you can unmute yourself and speak, or put your questions in the chat box. Please come forward with some questions.
Hello, Parvathy ma'am. It was wonderful listening to your talk. I just wanted to find out whether you're talking about Anjami's, the women, talking about how the female mutilation, it sort of empowers them. I somehow find it very problematic because it is actually um, it's actually a not only it's not it's apart from the physical cut that is made. I think it's more of a attack on a person's identity. So, could you please elaborate on that? Could you please throw some more light as to how the women, they think that through FGM, there is, they become as powerful or at par with men. Could you please explain that once again? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for your question. Well, it's a very important question. I wasn't trying to say it is good or it is bad. What she's trying to give is a different perspective on it, right? So what she's trying to say is, in her culture, against the backdrop of the Mau rebellion, this was something that kind of facilitated a kind of collective resistance, individual and collective resistance, and something which made many women in the group feel like warriors of that. That's just another perspective on it. I did not say what she said is right, and that is, of course, it's a relative position, isn't it? I think that's one of the fundamental things, isn't it? Yeah.
Very
Well,
good.
I
Very good. Thank you.
well, that is a very problematic position to say. I was in no way, kind of agreeing with what she said. But decolonial feminist knowledge production is about offering counter histories. Well, this is what distinguishes it from post-colonial knowledge production, which focuses more on territory and the political aspect of it, right? The politics of territory. This one has more to do with knowledge production. So I think one of the things that Lugon said is also theorizing from multiple bodies, multiple histories, multiple cultures. So if she feels this way, somebody else feels a different way, isn't it? So it's based on like the lived experience. The whole question of epistemology. How do we know what we know, right? So, and there's also the question of ontology, which is about, of being, isn't it? So, I think that's why that emphasis is so important. I think, but that whole subjective objective clash, it becomes a big mountain to deal with. Now, that's where we kind of, integrate testimonies to present different perspectives on this, but we can't really narrow it down to one thing. It's very much a gray area, isn't it? I hope I answered what
Yeah,
you're trying
yeah.
to say.
Thank you
I
so
was
much.
in no way trying to,
Okay,
yeah, what?
I probably misheard that. Sorry for that. Thanks
That's
for the
okay.
thanks for the elaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Any other question?
Um, Parvathy ma'am, I would also like to know whether post-colonial and, as you said, decolonial, are they the same or roughly the same, or is there a vast difference between the two?
Well, decolonial kind of goes and examines what happened. It goes into studying pre-colonial societies as well. I remember I asked this question to my professor when I was at SOAS. What she told me was, this is Professor Althea Maria Rivas speaking, along with Samia Khatun, Professor Samia Khatun. What they told me when I asked this was, the other one has more to do with the sort of geographical aspect of it, or the politics of territory bit. This one focuses more on knowledge production. But whereas if you're saying decolonial, it kind of looks at what, it kind of even studies what happened before the colonial rule, right? Whereas the other one is post-colonial, right? So this one
Yeah, yeah.
looks at,
Okay.
yeah, so that was one of the, that's another thing that they highlighted and told me. So this would require a very careful consideration of what was it like, right? Beginning is a very problematic issue again. But, you kind of go into different layers and histories even prior to colonial rule. Whereas the other one where you're looking specifically at the post-colonial, right?
Yeah. Thank
So,
you.
but this has more to do with knowledge production. That is the main thing.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a great question, actually.
No one has any question?
Parvathy ma'am, I'd like to know what your research is all about. Right now, I understand you are a research scholar.
Yeah. Well, I work on different subjects. So, while I'm working on how life writing becomes a means of critiquing the development discourse to address human rights violations. So, I work on these three subjects. But well, I also have an affiliation with Birkbeck University of London. So every year I'm at the London Critical Theory Summer School. So I don't know. Every year, depending on the theme, you end up studying random things. Last this year, it was on forensic architecture, investigative aesthetics, and things like that. So I kind of like to work on different subjects. It's something that I'm really interested in. So gradually, I'm making my move towards psychoanalysis now. But that's just like a side interest. But I'm kind of interested. I like to work between subjects. Yeah, a very liminal state.
That sounds
Uh,
very interesting.
yeah, yeah. You're free to ask any questions you want. You can ask about scholarships if you want. You can ask about research proposals if you want. PhD scholarship or applications or MA scholarships or whatever you want. I think they're all saturated with theory. And no one wants to talk about it.
Probably the time is also to blame. People
Yeah,
lunch, they must be sleepy.
yeah.
Because it's a Sunday also. So,
Oh, yeah.
If there is no question, Anisha, please.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Resource Person, Ms. Parvathy Salil, Respected Principal, Dr. Sujit CP, IQSC Coordinator, Srimati Chandni PM, Webinar Coordinator, Dr. Bhavya B, all the other teachers, and our enthusiastic participants. It's my pride and honor to express my gratitude on behalf of Department of English. We're extremely happy and fortunate to have Ms. Parvathy Salil as a resource person here. The talk on board member assistance in decolonial studies was indeed interesting as well as enhanced our horizon of this topic. We are looking forward to associate with you, ma'am. In view of Department of English, I express my sincere and heartfelt thanks to our guest, Ms. Parvathy Salil. Thank you, ma'am, for being a part of this webinar series. I extend my gratitude to our principal, Dr. Sujit CP, who worked relentlessly for the growth of our institution. Thank you, sir, for the unwavering support you are pondering on us. I also express my sincere and heartfelt gratitude to our IQSC coordinator and icon of loyalty, Srimati Chandni PM, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science. Thank you, ma'am. I'm being honored to express my gratitude to the silent powerhouse of knowledge, RHOD, Mr. A. Vinod Kumar, for chairing the program. Thank you, sir. I express my love and gratitude to the vibrant and vivid Dr. Maureen Abraham, Head, Department of Journalism, who delivered welcome speech. Thank you, ma'am. I also extend my heartfelt thanks to the young and agile comparer, Ms. Nandita Yum, Assistant Professor, Department of English. Thank you for moving the program on. I convey my sincere gratitude to Dr. Bhavya B., Assistant Professor, Department of Physics, and the coordinator of Guruvachan 2023 for the constant support. Thank you, ma'am. I also express my sincere thanks to our all participants who have been participating as the pillars of this event. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.